There was a night your soulmate knew nothing about. A night when the world around you had gone completely quiet, but inside your heart, everything was falling apart. You didn't call them. You didn't send another message. You didn't tell anyone how badly it hurt. You simply sat there, carrying emotions you had been hiding for far too long. And when the tears finally came, you made sure nobody could hear them. But here's where everything changes. Somehow your soulmate has now learned about that night. Maybe your name came up in a conversation they weren't expecting. Maybe someone revealed something you never intended them to know. Maybe one small detail connected all the pieces they had ignored before. However it happened, they weren't prepared for what they discovered. Because until now, they had convinced themselves that you were okay. They believed your silence meant you had stopped caring. They thought your distance meant the connection hadn't affected you as deeply as it affected them. But now they know the truth. You weren't cold. You were hurting. You weren't trying to punish them. You were protecting a heart that had already taken more than it could carry. And that realization has completely broken something open inside them. They're replaying your last conversations differently now. They're remembering the moments when your voice changed, when your replies became shorter, when you said you were fine, even though something behind those words was begging to be understood. And now one question keeps returning when everything gets quiet. How did I not see it? Stay with me, because what they're feeling right now goes much deeper than guilt. Learning about your tears awakened emotions they thought they had buried. And what they finally understand about that night may change the way they see you and this connection forever. The hardest truth your soulmate has been forced to face isn't that you cried. It's that you cried because of a pain they never realized you were carrying. For so long, they believed the silence between you meant everything had settled. They assumed that time had erased the emotions, that you had found peace, or that your heart simply moved on without looking back. They never imagined that behind your calm words was someone fighting a battle no one else could see. That's what shattered them. It wasn't just discovering that you were hurting. It was discovering how alone you were while you were hurting. Suddenly, every memory they once held with certainty has become uncertain. Every goodbye feels different. Every unanswered message has a different meaning. Every moment they thought was ordinary now feels like a silent cry they completely failed to hear. You may wonder why this realization is affecting them so deeply now instead of back then. The answer is simple. People often don't recognize the weight of another person's silence until they finally learn what that silence was hiding. It's easy to misunderstand someone who never complains. It's easy to believe someone is strong because they never ask for help. But strength and silent suffering are often mistaken for each other. Your soulmate is beginning to understand that while they believed you were simply giving them space, you were actually trying to protect yourself from breaking completely. That realization carries a kind of heartbreak that no explanation can soften. Imagine receiving a handwritten letter years after it was written, only to discover it contained words that could have changed everything if you had read them sooner. The paper may be old, but the emotions are still alive. Every sentence suddenly feels heavier because you realize how much time was lost. That's what this discovery feels like to them. Or imagine walking through a beautiful garden every day without noticing one flower quietly fading in the corner. Then one morning, you finally see it and realize it had been asking for care all along without making a sound. The guilt doesn't come from what you see in that moment. It comes from knowing it was there the entire time, and you simply weren't paying attention. Now their mind keeps returning to one painful question they can't answer. What if I had noticed? What if they had asked one more question instead of assuming everything was okay? What if they had listened a little longer instead of rushing through the conversation? What if they had recognized the sadness hidden behind your smile? Those questions have become impossible to silence because regret always speaks louder after the truth is revealed. They aren't trying to rewrite the past because they know they can't. They're trying to understand how someone they cared about managed to carry so much pain without ever asking them to carry even a small part of it. This is where many people misunderstand love. They assume that if someone truly cared, they would have noticed everything immediately. But the heart doesn't always see clearly when fear, confusion, pride, or emotional immaturity cloud its vision. Sometimes people mistake quietness for healing. Sometimes they confuse distance with acceptance. Sometimes they believe that if someone stops talking about their pain, the pain must have disappeared. Your soulmate is now realizing how dangerous those assumptions can be. They understand that your silence wasn't the absence of love. It was the presence of wounds that had grown too deep to explain with words. There is an old truth that fits this moment perfectly. The deepest tears are often the ones no one ever sees. Your soulmate finally understands that your tears belong to that kind of pain. They weren't meant to manipulate anyone or gain sympathy. They were simply the honest expression of a heart that kept loving even while it was quietly breaking. And now that this truth has reached them, something unexpected has begun to happen. Their thoughts are no longer focused on what they lost. They're focused on the person who endured all of that pain without ever trying to make them feel guilty. That quiet strength is touching their heart in a way they never thought possible, and it's awakening emotions they can no longer hide from themselves. There is something about regret that nobody prepares you for. It doesn't arrive the moment the mistake is made. It arrives when the heart finally understands the pain it caused. That's exactly where your soulmate finds themselves now. Ever since they learned about that night, their mind has refused to let it go. They thought discovering the truth would answer their questions, but instead it created even more. Now they keep replaying every memory, searching for the signs they somehow overlooked. They remember your smile, but now they wonder what it was hiding. They remember your quiet moments, but now they ask themselves if those moments were cries for understanding they completely missed. They remember the times you simply said, "I'm okay," and suddenly those words no longer sound comforting. They sound heartbreaking. The more they think about it, the more they realize that the strongest people are often the ones carrying the heaviest pain and complete silence. Have you ever watched a movie for a second, time, and noticed clues that were there from the very beginning? The ending suddenly makes every earlier scene feel different. Dialogues you barely noticed become the most important parts of the story. Expressions that once seemed ordinary suddenly carry hidden meaning. Nothing in the movie changed, only your understanding changed. That's exactly what is happening inside your soulmate's heart. They're revisiting every conversation they shared with you, but this time they're seeing it through the truth they recently discovered. The pauses make sense now. The distance makes sense now. Even the moments when you chose silence instead of arguing suddenly reveal a pain they never recognized. It's almost unbearable because they're realizing that while they believed they understood your heart, they had only seen the surface. Now, another question begins to grow inside them. How long were they hurting before I ever noticed? That question follows them into quiet moments. It appears when they wake up in the morning and when they try to fall asleep at night. They find themselves wondering what you were thinking during those lonely hours. Did you hope they would call? Did you wait for one message that never came? Did you wipe away your tears and convince yourself to stay strong because you believed nobody would understand anyway? These thoughts don't leave easily because compassion has finally replaced assumption. They are no longer defending their actions. They are trying to understand your experience, and that is a completely different kind of emotional journey. Imagine standing in front of a beautiful stained glass window while the room is completely dark. At first, all you see are outlines. Nothing appears remarkable, but the moment sunlight begins shining through, every color suddenly comes alive. The window was always beautiful. The light simply revealed what had been hidden. That's what the truth has done to your soulmate's memories. The memories themselves haven't changed, but the light of understanding has transformed everything they thought they knew. Or imagine hearing an old voice recording years after it was made. You'd recognize every word, but this time you hear the emotion behind the voice instead of only the words themselves. Suddenly your heart understands what your ears missed the first time. That is the kind of realization they are experiencing now. You may be asking yourself why they haven't reached out yet if they're thinking about you so much. The answer isn't because they don't care. It's because their heart is caught between love and regret. They fear that any words they choose may be too late. They wonder whether they even deserve the opportunity to explain themselves after learning how deeply you suffered. Guilt has a way of making people hesitate, not because they feel nothing, but because they fear causing even more pain. Every time they think about contacting you, another voice inside them whispers, "What if they've already healed? What if hearing from me only opens old wounds again?" So they remain silent, not because they've forgotten you, but because they are carrying emotions they don't yet know how to express. There's an old saying that speaks directly to this moment. The heart understands what the eyes failed to see. Your soulmate is living that truth right now. They finally understand that love isn't only measured by the moments we share, it's also measured by the pain we unknowingly leave behind. They are beginning to see that while they were focused on their own fears, questions, and circumstances, you were quietly carrying emotions that deserved comfort instead of loneliness. That realization has become impossible to escape. It follows them through ordinary days and peaceful nights alike. They aren't simply remembering you anymore. They're feeling what they should have felt back then, and the weight of that delayed understanding is changing something deep within their heart. Without realizing it, they have reached a turning point where remembering your tears is no longer just a painful memory. It has become the reason they can no longer ignore what this connection truly means. The deepest transformations never begin with words. They begin with silence. Not the silence that separates two people, but the silence that forces someone to finally hear the truth they've been running from. That's exactly what's happening inside your soulmate now. Ever since they learned about the night you cried because of them, something has shifted in a way they never expected. They haven't suddenly become emotional because someone told them they should. They've become emotional because, for the first time, they're seeing the connection through your eyes instead of their own. They are beginning to understand that while they were trying to make sense of their own confusion, you were carrying heartbreak they never even knew existed. That realization has become impossible to ignore. It follows them into ordinary moments. They think about it while driving, while working, while sitting alone in complete silence. They may look completely normal on the outside, but inside, their heart is asking questions that refuse to disappear. How many times did they hide their pain just to protect me? How many opportunities did I have to notice? How could someone love me that deeply and still choose silence instead of making me feel guilty? Those questions have become the beginning of a transformation they never saw coming. Imagine a frozen river that has remained covered in ice through an endless winter. From the outside, everything appears solid, cold, and unchanged. But the moment spring arrives, the ice doesn't disappear all at once. Small cracks begin forming beneath the surface. Water slowly starts moving again. What looked lifeless was simply waiting for the right season to awaken. That's what has happened to your soulmate's heart. They may have spent months convincing themselves they had accepted everything. They may have believed the past belonged in the past. But learning about your silent tears became the warmth that finally reached the places inside them they had kept frozen for far too long. Now emotions they buried are beginning to move again. Compassion has replaced defensiveness. Reflection has replaced certainty. Instead of asking why things happened, they're beginning to ask what they should have done differently. This is why their behavior may feel different, even if they haven't spoken a single word. Sometimes people become quieter not because they have nothing to say, but because they're finally listening to their own conscience. They replay conversations that once seemed insignificant. They remember moments when you looked away instead of making eye contact. They think about messages they answered too quickly or not at all. Even your smallest acts of kindness now carry a meaning they completely missed before. It's almost as if someone handed them a key to a room they never realized existed. When they opened that door, they didn't just find memories. They found your hidden pain waiting there all along. You may be wondering why they still haven't reached out if their heart has changed this much. Why are they still holding back? Because true remorse often walks hand in hand with fear. They fear that hearing your voice will remind them of everything they failed to protect. They fear that saying, "I'm sorry," may never be enough after discovering how deeply you suffered. Most of all, they fear that you've already learned to live without them. Imagine standing outside a house you once called home after years away. You want to knock on the door more than anything, but a quiet voice keeps asking, "What if nobody opens it? What if I'm too late?" That uncertainty can keep even the sincerest heart standing still. Their silence isn't always hesitation born from indifference. Sometimes it's hesitation born from realizing how valuable something truly was, only after almost losing it forever. There is an old saying that speaks directly to this moment. The wound you never saw is often the one that changes you the most. Your soulmate is beginning to understand the meaning behind those words. They always believed love was measured by the moments people shared together. Now they're discovering that love is also measured by the tears someone hides, so the other person doesn't have to carry them. They are realizing that your strength wasn't pretending everything was fine. Your strength was continuing to love without turning your pain into a weapon. You never tried to make them feel guilty. You never demanded that they carry your sorrow. Instead, you carried it yourself, hoping that one day understanding would arrive naturally. That realization has humbled them more than any argument ever could. Another image comes to mind. Imagine walking into a room that has been dark for years. At first, you reach for a small light, expecting to see only a few forgotten objects. But as the room slowly brightens, you realize it contains an entire life you never noticed before. Every corner tells a story. Every shadow hides something meaningful. That's exactly what your soulmate is experiencing. The truth didn't simply illuminate one painful night. It illuminated the entire journey your heart traveled while they remained unaware. They are beginning to see how many sacrifices you quietly made, how many emotions you swallowed, how many times you chose understanding over blame. Each realization adds another piece to a picture they never knew existed. What makes this transformation so powerful is that it isn't being forced by anyone else. No one is demanding they feel guilty. No one is telling them how to think. Their own heart has become their greatest teacher. The more they reflect, the more they understand that real love isn't about never making mistakes. It's about allowing those mistakes to change you into someone capable of loving more honestly than before. That process cannot be rushed. It happens layer by layer, truth by truth, memory by memory. Every day brings another realization. Every quiet moment softens another part of the wall they built around their emotions. And here's the part that changes everything. This awakening isn't leading them toward hopelessness. It's leading them toward courage. They are beginning to understand that the greatest act of love isn't pretending the past never happened. It's having the humility to face it with an open heart. For the first time, they are no longer asking whether this connection mattered. They know it did. The only question left is whether the universe has revealed your silent tears, not to end this story, but to prepare both of your hearts for a conversation that can only happen once. Truth, compassion, and genuine understanding finally stand in the same place. Everything that has happened was leading to this moment, but not for the reason you may think. The universe didn't allow your soulmate to discover the night you cried, so they would live with guilt forever. It allowed them to see it because some hearts cannot truly awaken until they finally understand the pain another heart carried in silence. There are lessons that words can never teach. There are truths that only tears can reveal. That night, when you believed nobody knew how deeply you were hurting, you probably felt completely alone. You may have wondered whether your love had been invisible all along. You may have questioned whether your feelings mattered at all. But what you couldn't see then was that even your silent suffering was becoming part of a much greater story. Not a story built on punishment or revenge, but one built on awakening. Sometimes the deepest healing begins with the hardest realization. And for your soulmate, that realization has finally arrived. Think about a seed buried beneath the ground. For weeks, even months, it appears as though nothing is happening. The earth above it remains unchanged. To anyone looking from the outside, it seems forgotten. But beneath the surface, unseen roots are quietly growing stronger. Then one day, without warning, something breaks through the soil. People call it sudden, but it was never sudden. It was the result of countless invisible moments, preparing it to grow. Your connection has followed that same pattern. The tears you cried weren't wasted. Every lonely night, every unanswered question, every silent prayer became roots that were strengthening something neither of you could yet understand. What feels like a heartbreaking ending was quietly becoming the beginning of a completely different chapter. You may still wonder why life had to unfold this way. Why couldn't understanding have come sooner? Why couldn't they have recognized your pain before your heart reached its breaking point? Those are questions almost every wounded heart asks at some point. The honest answer is that people often grow at different speeds. One heart may already be ready to love deeply, while another is still learning what love truly requires. Your soulmate couldn't fully appreciate the depth of your emotions until they were willing to confront the parts of themselves they had been avoiding. Sometimes wisdom arrives only after loss. Sometimes compassion is born from regret. As difficult as that truth may be, it has changed them forever. They are no longer seeing this connection through the eyes of fear, confusion, or emotional immaturity. They're seeing it through empathy, and empathy changes everything it touches. Imagine holding a piece of broken pottery that seems impossible to repair. Every crack reminds you of what was lost. Then someone carefully begins restoring it, not by hiding the cracks, but by filling them with gold. The object doesn't return to what it once was. It becomes something even more meaningful because every fracture now tells a story of survival instead of destruction. Your hearts are much like that. The pain didn't erase the love that existed between you. It revealed where healing was needed. The tears you cried didn't weaken this connection. They exposed its deepest wounds so they could finally be acknowledged instead of ignored. Real healing never pretends the cracks don't exist. It transforms them into reminders of how far both hearts have come. There is an old truth that deserves to be remembered here. The heart that has learned compassion loves more deeply than the heart that has never been broken. Your soulmate is beginning to understand this in a way they never could before. They no longer think only about what they felt. They think about what you carried alone. They no longer measure this relationship by misunderstandings or missed opportunities. They measure it by the quiet strength you showed without demanding recognition. They are beginning to realize that while they were searching for answers outside themselves, you were teaching them the greatest lesson without saying a word, that genuine love is patient, honest, and willing to endure pain without becoming bitter. As this chapter quietly comes to an end, don't let your heart remain trapped in the memory of that lonely night. Let it remember something even greater. You survived it. The tears eventually stopped. The sunrise still came. You continued walking even when you believed nobody understood the weight you were carrying. That strength became part of who you are, and nothing can take it away. Your soulmate may now carry the ache of understanding, but you carry something even more valuable, the wisdom that comes from loving with sincerity despite the pain. Whether this connection leads to reunion, healing, or simply deeper understanding, one truth remains unchanged. Your tears were never invisible. They were simply waiting for the moment when the right heart would finally understand what they meant. And now that moment has arrived. The silence that once held your sorrow is beginning to hold something entirely different: hope, healing, and the possibility that two hearts who once misunderstood each other may finally begin seeing each other with the honesty they both needed from the very beginning.